I'm Skip Reimer. I'm the Executive Director of Events here at the Milken Institute. On behalf of all of us at the Milken Institute, welcome to the start of the 18th Annual Milken Institute Global Conference. Now, if you've been here before, welcome back. We're delighted to see you. If you've never been here before, well, all I can say is buckle your seatbelts. You're in for quite a ride. We have a jam-packed event from this morning to the end of the day, Wednesday. I don't know how we did it, but we have set another record. We have another record number of speakers this year, over 700, on 130 public panels and another almost 100 private sessions and events. Now, details about the whole program is available on the printed program you received when you registered, or I highly recommend you download the Milken Institute Global Conference app that has everything you need in terms of following the conference. Now, one bit of warning I need to give is we are at capacity again this year, and that means that there are times when a panel you may want to go to is full. The fire marshal does require us to close the doors once the panel is full, no standing. So I would especially urge you at the 10:45 slot this morning, when we don't have the International Ballroom because it's getting set up for lunch, if there's something you really want to get to, I suggest you get there early to ensure yourself a seat. And I apologize if you don't get to see the panel you wanted to, but if there's any panel that has seats available, you're welcome to attend that. Also, one other reminder about lunch. If you did not get a ticket for in your registration packet for lunch, go to the lunch concierge, is right next to registration, and they'll take care of you. So we're delighted to have you. Have a wonderful time here at Global Conference, and thank you so much for coming. And now I'd like to introduce the moderator of the opening panel, a man that I wake up to every morning, and let me explain that remark. I read his highly read daily political playbook email every morning. It's a great piece. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief White House Correspondent for Politico, Mike Allen.
Well, thank you very much, Skip, and congratulations on this amazing conference. 3,500 of us from 60 countries. It's such an honor to be here, and none of us would be here without Michael Milken, who over so many decades has been one of the early disruptors, one of the early people working to improve the status quo, whether it was in medical research, whether it's in public health, public education. So it's an honor to be here, and what a treat to be on this panel. And this is very handy for me as well, because when I want to know what's going on, these are the people that I call. So we have them all here in one place, which is a real treat. Senator Bai was on my plane last night. He's a moderate Democrat, two-term senator, two-term governor, so he knows it from both ends of the telescope, and is now a senior advisor to Apollo Global Management, a partner at McGuire Woods, based out in Richmond, where I used to work. And you've heard of a double Harvard. Usually we think of the undergraduate degree, law degree. Senator Bai has a double Harvard. Explain what your double Harvard is.
Well, we have twin sons, and they're both finishing their freshman year. It's obviously I married up, but my wife is responsible for that. We refer to that as the Indiana University of the East.
Very nice. He says they have dinner together every Sunday night, which is very nice. Ed Gillespie has been a friend for a long time, someone I so admire. A remarkable journey, was a Senate parking lot attendant when he was at Catholic University, went on to become an insurgent candidate for Senate in Virginia last year, has been the RNC chairman, has worked at the top of our American government as counselor to President George W. Bush, and has pulled off one of the sort of under the radar successes in American politics. He was part of getting so many Republican governors elected, which has made such a difference in the presidential race. Jason Grumet, and he says, pretend it's French, but it's really Ellis Island, is one of Washington's great thought leaders. He's founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center. He wrote the book, City of Rivals, Restoring the Glorious Mess of American Democracy, and Jason's a double Ivy. Frank is going to tee us up here with a video in just 2 seconds. He is going to show us the 2016 campaign foretold in 2 minutes. Frank, who's one of the hardest workers in the business, one of the most admired and respected communication strategists in the business. He's someone who talks to presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and today he's talking to us, which we are so grateful for. He's been called the Nostradamus of pollsters, so we'll see how good he is today. And Van Jones, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your being on the panel. He has worked in the White House as an advisor on green jobs policy, and since then has become one of the leading voices on the issue of incarceration and continuing on green jobs, and works a lot with young people and has some great ideas for us, someone who's always in the mix. So Van Jones, thank you for being here. And he's president of Dream Corps Unlimited, and you see him on CNN. So Frank Luntz, who is someone who knows members of Congress personally, talks to everyone, knows everyone. He's here today and has an amazing video to tee us up. So why don't you just set it up and then we'll hit play.
So those of you who know what I do this instant response, which are moment-by-moment reactions.
Wait, just tell us about your shoes.
They're not on camera, so nobody can see them. And believe me, you do not want me to take these off.
Now, are these Hokas? What are these?
These are...
Hold them up so they can see.
Show us a little leg, Frank.
So these are one of a kind. These are produced for me by a number of different shoe companies. I don't get paid for it, but I do get free shoes. And if I have to dress like this on CBS and Fox, then this is what I'm going to dress underneath. You guys don't realize, but I'm actually half naked when I do some of these focus groups. They just shoot me, and there's so much up top that they shoot me from up here. This is a 2-minute, can I go to the real substance now?
Boom.
It's a 2-minute video, and it's instant response. So we have people who use a device about the size of a remote control, and they react on a second-by-second basis to the words and phrases that they're seeing and to how people react. And we've collected 2 minutes of the leading candidates. And what you're going to see is, and I want you to watch Hillary Clinton's eyes as she speaks, as she delivers her explanation of the emails. Watch the difference between Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Scott Walker in terms of the passion in how they communicate. This is basically 2 minutes. The higher the lines climb, the more favorable the reaction. If it's over 70, it's good. If it's over an 80, it's amazing. If the lines go down, you have a real problem. Let's roll the tape, and this is going to be 2016 in 2 minutes.
No matter who you are or where you come from,
The idea that if you work hard
if you work hard
and play by the rules,
and you play by the rules,
if you're working hard and playing by the rules,
if you work hard and play by the rules,
we're going to lift you up and out of poverty in this country today.
American families are working harder than ever.
People are working hard.
And that's what we hope 2016 will be. Just a lot of words and no visuals. See, the problem is Mike Milken spends his time on saving people's lives rather than making audiovisual work. So I guess if you guys can figure out...
Tell us, if we get back to it, it's fine, but tell us the conclusion. Like, who would watch these dial groups and be worried, and who would watch these dial groups and be encouraged?
It's interesting because the two most experienced candidates, Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, would be the most worried. I'll point out 2 things about what she does, just so you watch in the future. And I'm not judging what she says, how she says it. She never looks people straight in the eye. She always looks up. If she's delivering a speech, when she delivers speeches rather than engages, she always looks up here and up there, and there's nobody up there. We expect our politicians to look us in the eye and tell us the truth. And she is so focused either on what's down on her page that she doesn't interact. And second with her is that there's a very divisive tone to it. There's always an enemy in her communication. And the American public is tired of that, from Republicans and from Democrats. They don't want this division. They want to know those areas that you may have some agreement. And because of that divisive nature, I think she's going to have a challenge going forward in 2016. And they also want to know that you love America. And this is, and you don't say to someone, you don't challenge them, well, does he love America? The question that they asked about Barack Obama, that was a mistake. But I will tell you, in the Republican primary, one of the reasons why Marco Rubio does so well is because his whole speech is about why America changed his life, changed his family. And Rubio right now is the best communicator on the Republican side, and part of it is his embrace of the American dream and all the things about American exceptionalism.
Senator Bai, which Republican candidate do you consider most dangerous to Democrats?
I think the thing that Republicans have going for them is it's hard to win a third term. And I think Frank was getting to this some. So if they nominate someone, and I happen to think very highly of Jeb Bush, as we were just talking about last night, but I think the thing that the Republicans have going for them is if they can nominate someone who's new, fresh, inspirational, I think that gives them the best chance of winning.
That sounds like Marco Rubio.
Well, the two people I think, look, Frank would know better than I, but the way I'm looking at it right now, it's Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker, and then everybody else. And I think Walker, who's a governor, not part of the quote-unquote mess in Washington, he's got a record he could point to. He's younger as well. He has a story. But I think if Marco Rubio can project the gravitas, the sense that he's ready to handle not only domestically but globally the challenges that face America, and there will be international crises between now and the election, he has the biggest potential to grow into a formidable transformational candidate. So I'd say Rubio and then Walker probably have the most potential to be very formidable.
Ed Gillespie, if we could talk about the substance of what we're going to hear in this campaign. You mentioned to me that during your own campaign, you came to realize as you traveled all parts of Virginia that the people at this conference are doing very well. The people at the very bottom also are protected. But you talk about the second quintile just getting crushed. Tell us about that.
Well, it's true. I think when you look at the economy over the past 6 years, the fact is we've had an asset-based recovery fueled, I think, largely by Fed policy, and the wealthy have seen their portfolio values go up. In the bottom 20%, where no one wants to be in poverty, there have been, however, benefits to help in terms of the safety net that have been enacted. The true middle class, and I hate talking in terms of quintiles, but that's how the economists, divide the population in terms of income, have felt very squeezed. I saw that in my campaign. The fourth quintile, the upper middle class, have felt that squeeze a little less. But if you are the non-college educated working poor in this country today, in that second quintile, you've seen your wages stagnate, opportunities diminish, working hours be reduced oftentimes to 27 hours a week in weekly wages instead of 40 hours a week. Out-of-pocket expenses for healthcare have gone up. Food prices are up, and there's a sense of a lack of opportunity and a lot of the fundamental changes in the economy, automation and incentives that have taken place, globalization. It is a very difficult time, and my fear is that there's a sense of hopelessness to a certain extent creeping in. And I think the most important thing for us to do as a party on the Republican side is to come forward with an agenda that addresses the needs of the working poor in this country today. And I think that will resonate not only with the working poor, but with people who have more means. But to me, that a moral case for our policies, I think, is imperative in this election cycle. And to me, that segment of our electorate has to have their concerns addressed.
And Ed Gillespie, are you saying that Republicans are likely to address this, or you just think they should?
I think they will. I think Republicans are likely to address it. I think you have to. I think it is so. Once you get on the campaign trail, and that was, it was an exhilarating experience for me to be out there myself, to be in the coal mines, to be out on the port and in the apple orchards, and talking to people who make hourly wages, and it's just clear. That is there's something tectonic going on in our economy, and I clearly don't believe the policies of this administration have helped those folks. We need to make a case for why our policies do.
Ben Jones, we've heard Marco Rubio talk about moving people out of the middle class, upward mobility. If Republicans start to address this inequality issue, start to address some of these economic issues, they could really cut into the Democratic coalition.
It's conceivable. It's conceivable. I think there's a level of economic pain and frustration and hopelessness across all racial groups the further down you get. But I think those of us who are doing well just completely misread. People are very, very desperate at this point. That's part of the reason that I think people may be misreading what's going on in the Democratic Party. Because Hillary Clinton is just the untouchable favorite, there's a view that the Democratic Party is a lot more solid than it is. This hunger for an Elizabeth Warren or for someone else really speaks to a couple of things. First of all, Hillary Clinton is inheriting a party she did not build. The party that the Clintons built, Obama's really a transitional step away from. Elizabeth Warren is really probably the destination point, as uncomfortable as that may make some people feel. Why? It's because the Democratic coalition now is a true rainbow coalition. And you have concerns in our coalition that really no party's addressing well yet. It opens the door for Republicans. I've been working with Newt Gingrich. I actually had a TV show with Newt Gingrich, Crossfire, for about a year. It turned out Newt and I agreed on absolutely nothing, right? Except an issue that Mr. Gillespie actually ran on, incarceration, criminal justice. It turns out that there is an issue there that both parties are starting to become very uncomfortable with. The number of people behind bars in our country, the number of nonviolent drug offenders who are getting 20 and 30 years for doing stuff that I saw kids doing at Yale Law School, and they didn't go to prison. We did a summit, Newt and I, in Washington, D.C. We thought we would have about 100 people be there for about 3 hours. Criminal justice reform. We had 800 people. We had everybody you expect for me to be able to bring. We had Eric Holder, he was there. Cory Booker, he was there. Donna Brazile, she was there. ACLU, no surprises there. Newt shows up with the Koch brothers, Alec, video greetings from Rick Perry. We had 2 cabinet level officials. Obama sent a video. We spent 8 hours, Republicans and Democrats, all saying, we've got to do a better job with these low-income, mostly young men of color, young women of color as well, who are winding up on a fast track to prison and not to incarceration. And the Republicans were more passionate about it in some respects than many Democrats.
Okay, Jason Grimay, this is your wheelhouse. There's an issue that both parties agree on. Why can't Congress act?
Well, so, the Bipartisan Policy Center believes in the constructive collision of ideas, right? It's exactly what Van's talking about. We're not post-partisan, non-partisan, meta-partisan. And I think the issue is that so oftentimes we say that, Washington is polarized and therefore dysfunctional.
Yes, we do.
But the difference is also true and actually offers more of a solution. We are also dysfunctional because we are polarized. In other words, that the extent to which the system just doesn't work, right? The members of Congress aren't spending time together in Washington. We're not actually spending time together in committees, which have always been the engines of democracy. Members of Congress don't take trips together anymore, which is, guess what? It's the 15-hour flight to Kazakhstan where you realize you actually have something in common with somebody else. The basic structures that have always allowed us to kind of metabolize the hostility that's essential in a democracy, kind of capture the diversity of this country and move things forwards, have been weakened. So I actually think shout out goes to Senator McConnell. April's been a pretty darn good month for American democracy. We should raise a half full bottle to Congress because they've actually solved some problems, right? We got out of the ridiculous situation of Congress not having a voice in the Iran debate. We've passed, through committee trade promotion authority, which is bringing the parties together. No Child Left Behind has moved through committee. We're actually seeing the Congress.
And what was the catalyst for that?
So in every place, it's a couple of different things. First of all, most people in Washington are good folks who want to govern. And most people in the country want the country to work. We've found a moment where actually the incentives for getting things done are good enough for people to venture a little bit of opportunity. So on Medicare, we've had this embarrassment for 20 years called the doc fix. 20 years ago, we said, hey, guess what? We're going to actually reduce costs in Medicare, and we capped the costs. And then 18 years in a row, we just threw money back at the problem. Boehner and Pelosi finally said, this is embarrassing. And guess what? They shut the door. They sat down. They brought their staff together. They reached out to organizations like ours, and they put a real deal together. 392 members of the House voted for it. 92 members of the Senate voted for it. It was kind of like deliberation in democracy. So, I think the muscle memory in the system is there. And I think we've seen a little bit of a shift in the last month. We'll talk about after to see whether that is sustainable.
Frank, once you know these Congress members personally, what is your long-term outlook for Congress working or not working?
I agree with everything that you said. I've always thought that these retreats, it's important that you bring the spouse. If you know your colleague who's next door to you but from a different political party, you know them in a personal way, you're not going to run the same campaign against them. I'm begging them, and I've offered to help financially sponsor it. Every year there should be a bipartisan retreat, House and Senate. And unfortunately, some of the leadership doesn't want that to happen because they don't want people to know each other. Because when they know each other, they cooperate, and they compromise, and they get stuff done. And I want the families to know each other. I want the kids to play together. It changes the dynamic. Second is that...
Wait. Who is it that doesn't want this to happen?
There are some in leadership in both political parties on the House and Senate that will lose some of their control if their members know each other. The other issue that we've got
Are you
is...
talking about the Speaker and Leader Pelosi?
I'm not, I know your tape recorder's on. I am not going to give you the quote to lead tomorrow's newspaper. Nice try.
It exists on both sides, Mike. Frank's exactly right. And look, if you are in leadership, you might not behave any differently either. But it's all about retaining control, because at the end of the day, your power depends upon your ability to deliver the votes. And if the members are out freelancing, forming coalitions on their own, you lose control of the process. And it's a bipartisan phenomenon. It's been going on for years. I've got a little perspective on this. Frank was exactly right. The personal relationships mean a lot. My father was in the Senate for 18 years. It was a different world. He'd have Republicans over to our home for dinner. We'd get to know their spouses, and I'd play with their kids and so forth. Can you imagine that Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader, came up to my father on the floor of the Senate when he was first running for his re-election in 1968. The Republican leader asked my father, a Democrat, "What can I do to help with your re-election?" Because they were friends with one another. These people had gone through World War II, the Great Depression, the struggle against global communism. They knew that there were greater threats to the Republic than members of another political party or people with a different ideology. And that's kind of dissipated today because they spend no time with one another. They become caricatures rather than human beings. So I think Frank was exactly right, and I hate to, forgive me for interrupting. One final thing, I wish we'd been able to see your video, Frank, and you asked me who the most effective Republicans would be. I'd say just one thing, Frank is right, likability is very important, trustworthiness is very important. She scores much higher on strength, are you a strong leader, and experience. And so if I was advising her, my advice would be, just say, look, if you're interested in inspirational rhetoric, maybe that's not my strongest suit. If you're interested in gauzy slogans, maybe that's not what I'm all about. But if you're interested in somebody who knows how to make this government work, who's strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin and others around the world, well, then I'm your person. And to run that kind of campaign, because there are other dynamics, there are other dimensions besides just likability and the things that we were alluding to in the video.
By the way, Senator, how often did you and I meet in your last term in the Senate?
A lot.
And
here's a Republican who likes Bobby Kennedy. He's my kind of Republican. Oh, hey,
Bobby Kennedy is the most inspirational. If you ever want to see the best speech of all, take a look at Bobby Kennedy after Martin Luther King's assassination.
In Indianapolis.
And it is absolutely incredible, and it will make, I don't care how conservative you are, it'll make you cry. And I used to meet with these guys, and Ed Gillespie, I was afraid that Ed would find out.
Now he knows. Senator Bai, what's the best advice that Frank ever gave you?
Be yourself. The voters figure it out ultimately if you're somebody, you pretended to be something you're not. And at the end of the day, the best advice I ever got, and I think Frank would give this to me too, but it came from my father, who lost his last election. And my father would tell you, there are a lot worse things in life than losing an election. And probably at the top of the list is not standing for anything.
That's right.
You gotta do what you think is right. And you win or lose, at the end of the day, you can put your head on the pillow and know you tried to make a difference. So that's the best advice I ever got. By the way, Van, one last thing, little vignette, I don't want to dominate the panel here. I inherited a prison crisis when I was the new governor. We had a federal court order, we didn't have enough prisons, so we had to go on a crash program building penitentiaries, which I would have a lot rather spent the money on something else. So I brought in a new head of the Department of Corrections, a man named Jim Aiken from South Carolina. He was really good, and I took an interest in this. I said, Jim, I don't want to have to build prisons, but I got to here. In the long run, what is the best predictor of the rise and fall of the inmate population so we don't end up in this kind of position? I'll never forget what he told me. He got a sad look on his face, and he said, Governor, if you want to know the best predictor of how many prison beds you're going to need in 10, 12, 13 years, look at the number of at-risk children.
Third grade.
In second, when he said second, third or second. You look at 8 and 9-year-olds. Now you can't, thank God, predict which ones are going to do well and which ones aren't. But the ebb and flow of that population predicts most accurately how many prisons you have to build. So we got to deal with the young men who are today and have issues. We got to rehabilitate. But in the long run, we got to really try and invest in making sure these kids get on the right track, not on the wrong track. So I'm so delighted you're dealing with that issue.
Well, I think it's something that people at this level of society really just don't have an occasion to think about very often. Let me just throw some numbers at you. This is going to become a much bigger deal than people expect in the presidential. You see all these protests out there around police relationships. What's driving that? It can't be this, this one kid who people don't really even know who he is. There's a much bigger dynamic at play. The United States is, we're actually a small country. We're 5% of the world's population. We have 25% now of the world's prisoners. That means 1 out of every 4 people locked up anywhere in the world are locked up right here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. The majority of those for nonviolent drug offenses. Overwhelmingly poor people. Basically, if you don't have enough money for a good lawyer, you're in deep trouble. What's been shocking for us, now from a social justice point of view, it's so disproportionately African American, Latino, it's not hard to get Democrats concerned. What's been shocking for us has been the Republican response of late. Very encouraging. All 3 legs of the domestic coalition for Republicans are expressing concern. Fiscal conservative governors like Kasich in Ohio, Rick Perry in Texas, Governor Deal in Georgia have actually said we don't want to keep raising taxes to pay for prisons that don't work. Why should conservatives support a big failed government bureaucracy called prisons that get bigger the worse they do? Corrections doesn't correct anymore. Something's wrong. Libertarians are now saying they're concerned about this threat to liberty for having so much police power. And then, most movingly, the Christian evangelicals have been speaking out saying if every soul matters to God, we've got to do a better job with these kids. And if they make a mistake and they try to come back, they've got to be given a second chance, a shot at redemption. Well, hold on a second. That means the core values of both political parties are being violated by the way we're doing this incarceration stuff. If we can come together and do something about it, we're wasting an awful lot of genius, frankly. Way too many poor black and brown kids winding up in jail and in the grave. If we can actually rescue some of that genius, restore some hope, and do it on a bipartisan basis, I think we can begin to reset both parties. Because there is a racial empathy problem that the Republicans, I think, can begin to correct for by showing some concern here.
And I'm going to give you the statistics, the indicators of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and criminal activity. And for those of you who have children under the age of 19, I suggest you write it down because there are people in this room who have kids who are at threat. Number 1, how often do you have dinner with your children? It has to be 5 days a week or more, or you're communicating to your kids that they aren't your first priority. And it has to be both parents, not one. One of the issues in the African American community is so many one-parent families that doesn't happen. Number 2, how often do you take them to religious services? They need to go once a week. And the reason why, if you believe in God, you're less likely to behave in an anti-physical, anti-intellectual way. Number 3, how often do you check your children's homework? Because that teaches them that their intellectual development, this is all in order, by the way, that their intellectual development is as important to them as their physical development. Number 4, do they tell you the truth, who they're hanging out with and where they are on Friday and Saturday night, and do you demand the truth? Because if they're going to lie to you about that, they'll lie to you about anything. Number 5, do you take them on a vacation? Do you take them away from their natural environment for at least 1 week a year, and do you put away your damn iPhone? Because I'm watching people already walking through here. You're walking into walls, you're walking into people, because you're sitting there reading this. Well, let me tell you something. If you're reading that and your kid is trying to talk to you, that child knows that whatever, or if you answer it in the middle of a conversation with your children, they'll know that whoever's there is more important than they are. And number 6 is a team sport, because that teaches them that they have responsibilities to other people. If you are 5 out of 6, your kids are going to be great. If you are 2 out of 6 or less, you got a real problem at home right now, and it affects you all in this room, not just in the inner city.
Ed, Senator Bayh was talking about the advice, be yourself. You were someone who knew both the theory and the mechanics of politics so intimately. Then you went out and did something that most of us don't have the guts to do, and that is you actually ran. What did you discover that surprised you about what works, about what voters want and respond to?
Well, and I made a commitment to myself that I would run as who I am on things I believe in, and kind of let the chips fall where they may. And but I did find that people want to know, and I think this is particularly true for an out-of-power party. It applies to the Republican Party today because we're not in control of the White House. But people want to know what we're for, and I put forward a very specific 5-point plan. For economic growth, to create jobs, raise take-home pay, lift people out of poverty, hold down healthcare costs, reduce energy prices. And that specific plan, I was one of, I think Ben Sass put forward some details in Nebraska for a replacement plan for Obamacare, but I put forward a very detailed plan that if I were elected, this is how I would replace the Affordable Care Act, and I've talked about it everywhere I went. And so I found that people want to know, what are your policies? How do they improve my life? I also, made a commitment that I was going to run a campaign. If I were going to be a senator, I'd be a senator for all Virginians, and I wanted to run a campaign to all Virginians. And I took that message, a positive message, to every corner of the Commonwealth and every segment of the electorate. And to Van's point, one of the things I did is I campaigned places a lot of Republicans don't go. Those 5 policies I talked about were on my website in 7 different languages. And one of the things I learned in talking to, in particular, black pastors was I listened to them about this concern about the mandatory minimums, about the felony box and the impact that it has, and on recidivism as well. And one of the things that I found in embracing these judicial reforms and mandatory minimum reforms as a conservative is that this is an area, to Van's point, and a lot of times, and the senator knows this, you work in the middle out. This is an area that's interesting because it's really an overlap of the right and the left, which you don't often see, almost in a circle, not a continuum. And so I learned that people are hungry to know what we're for. I will say this too, though, Mike, which is one of the things I found too as a candidate, as opposed to an advisor. It was a little frustrating to me the extent to which it's hard to get the media to report on issues and on policies. And so reporters, often on television shows and other places, are saying, oh, it's so frustrating, there's no substance, and substance-free campaigns, and nobody's talking about policies, and all they want to write about is the polling data, and what's your cash on hand.
And the polling data turned out not to be right anyway. You were doing much better than the polls said. Well, so Ed, your campaign was very creative about using social media, and by the way, we're #MIGlobal, so please feel free to tweet as we go here. And you put up a lot of pictures of yourself as you campaigned, and in particular, there were a lot of pictures of you eating wings. What was that about?
Well, there weren't a lot. There was in the home stretch. One of the things, we were a very digital-driven campaign and very effective in kind of building an organization and an identity with our supporters and all across the Commonwealth. But we also were tracking the data, and it turned out that one of the things we found was a lot of my supporters were big fans of Buffalo Wild Wings. And so we thought if we wanted to get more, if the flip side would be true too, maybe if people like Buffalo Wild Wings might be inclined to like me. And so I went to Buffalo Wild Wings and had a picture of me there with my wife, and we tweeted that out. We put it on Facebook, and it got us a surge of people who were following Buffalo Wild Wings on their hashtag to sign up for my campaign. So the digital, what you can do now in digital is a great equalizer. I was outspent 3-1. Lost by 0.8%, and a lot of that had to do with the way we deployed our digital operations.
What else did you learn from the digital social world that if you were a campaign in 2016 would be top of mind for you?
Well, I mean, we're all just content providers now. And you've got to we would do these little videos that I would, shoot off of my iPhone between 45 seconds to 1:15 and just put them up there, and, people eat them like popcorn. I mean, they just, people are hungry for it, and it helps you to, like I say, kind of build your own identity and to communicate, frankly, around the major media outlets and get your message to people in a way that is creative and interesting, but provides real substance as well.
Jason Grimay, I'm sorry. Okay. No, go ahead.
Well, I always love to hear from my good friend Jason. I just wanted to point out that the part of, if you're trying to understand the dynamics in the Democratic Party, what Ed was just talking about is very important. you know, everybody looks at the candidates. Everybody looks at the bundlers and the donors and the cable TV. Our party has been transformed from the bottom up over the past 8 years by 3 different, what I would call swarms, that don't actually go along with the normal rules of politics. The first swarm was what you would call the dreamers. These were the young, undocumented, mostly Latino kids who said, listen, we were brought here when we were 2 years old. We had nothing to do with it. We're Americans. We want to be able to stay here. We want to be able to give to the country. That wasn't top down. That really came out of a generation that hadn't been heard, and they organized themselves largely online, and they changed the way our party, the Democratic Party, relates to that entire issue, and then changed the way the country relates to it. Then you had Occupy Wall Street. Very similar thing. It was a brief protest in a way, but it changed the way the Democratic Party talked to itself in the country in 2012 about income inequality, about the middle class, about Wall Street, for better or for worse.
But they blew it. They had such an opportunity, and they went too far.
And that's the standard view. But that's the standard view. And what is missed by that standard view is the way that particular protest moment fizzled and failed. True. But it spawned what you're now seeing even the Republican Party responding to when it comes to the question of income inequality. I'm not speaking up for Occupy Wall Street. I'm saying that we continue to misread. Now there's another swarm, and that's the Black Lives Matter swarm. Very easy at our level to dismiss the Dreamers, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, but watch the impact that these continued swarms have on the way that the political elite has to discuss issues. We were not discussing criminal justice issues a year ago. We were not discussing economic inequality issues in 2011. So I think it's not just the candidates that have to take this digital reality seriously and the voice of all these people who are not traditionally a part of the process seriously. They are pushing themselves into the process. And the better people are at reading those trends and coming up with constructive solutions, actually constructive solutions to the concerns, I think the better politicians are going to perform.
But you got to remember the statistics for 2014, because these are all-time statistics. Republicans have more seats in the House of Representatives, and now I'm going to sound partisan, which I don't like, but Republicans have more seats in the House than any time since the 1920s. They have one less seat than their highest high water mark over the last, 50 years. They have 30 governors. They're one seat short of their high water mark, and they've got more state Senate and state House seats than ever in history.
And Romney had to come out and talk about income inequality in his first week because the aftermath of Occupy and Elizabeth Warren's great popularity is even pulling the Republicans to deal with the issues. Am I wrong on that, Frank?
But we need to look at where we are right now, and the fact is that, yes, you do still occupy the White House.
Sure.
But that's all you occupy. And if I were a Democratic strategist, I'd be screaming right now because you've lost the center. And you cannot win these legislative seats because people don't know who their legislators are. They vote based on party. You cannot win in this country without winning the center. And somehow, all across America, Massachusetts elected a Republican governor. Maryland elected a Republican governor. Illinois, his home state, elected a Republican governor. Nevada completely switched all across the country.
I hope every Republican listens to Frank and
wins like they did in 2014.
And breathes a huge sigh of relief because you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. There are dynamics that are coming that are going to make 2016 very different.
So the question is whether people actually show up and vote, right?
Yeah.
Because I think Van is, accurately naming the demographic trend in this country. But in the last midterms, less than 1 out of 5 folks showed up and voted in primaries. And participatory democracy actually requires a little bit of participation to get this point across, right? So I think it's just a question of when and how, and what do we do as a country to try to engage that kind of participation? I think both parties have a real obligation to try to improve engagement and the integrity of the voting system, right? And we've been having big fights about voter ID and registration lists, and those fights are important and need to happen. But keep an eye on just the basic guts of our election system. The thing is falling apart, right? We put a lot of money into our elections after Bush v. Gore. That was a long time ago. Those machines are now old. We are looking at a very tricky moment coming into 2016 about whether we just have the basic architecture to conduct this kind of election, whether we provide people opportunities to get to the polls. 1 out of 4 people who should be registered, all right? 1 out of 8 registrations is wrong. Jeff Bezos can deliver a pizza to your home by drone. Your county election official doesn't know whether you're living or dead. And so there's a significant amount of, I think, national focus on elections themselves that's going to be necessary to, I think, enable any of this to happen.
We have a remarkable audience here, and I want to take advantage of that. I want to bring you into the conversation very quickly. So in just a couple minutes, we'll bring a microphone right down to you. And I wanted to note that we're honored to have in the audience the Governor of North Carolina, Governor McCrory. We're honored to have you here. And while we're bringing a microphone right down here, I wanted to ask Frank, of the Republican candidates, which one has the most potential, the one who isn't doing well today, but might be doing well 90 days from now?
I have 3 statistics that I look for. One is, who is your second choice? Because you're not going to be able to move up unless you get to that position. The second I look for is the ratio of positive to negative. Because I don't know candidates, even if they have great intensity, the higher the ratio, the more likely they are to move. And the third is, what percentage of people view you favorably as a percentage of those who know who you are. So someone like a Scott Walker or a Marco Rubio are less well known, and yet their ratios are incredible. And in Rubio's case, he is the #1 choice. He's #1 for everyone's second choice, even though he's still a little bit behind someone like Jeb Bush. Actually, there are 4 things. I don't care what happens in America. I care what happens in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. I don't do national polls anymore. I only do those 4 states.
But which
doesn't matter. Iowa, New Hampshire, and they're very different. Iowa, say a prayer. New Hampshire, make sure you tip well. South Carolina, get the hell out, and that will cost me the chance to moderate something in South Carolina and Nevada. And the 2, and it's been mentioned, they mentioned it down there, was Marco Rubio and Scott Walker. Walker because he's a governor, Rubio because, and with a very strong record, and Rubio because he's such a good communicator.
If Jeb Bush is not the nominee, it will be why?
Oh, and by the way, because I can see the cameras, this drives me crazy. You really just want me to kill myself
Yes.
up on stage. Every question you ask me.
Can I take him off the hook here,
The
Mike?
first thing that he says to me when I walk in here is, Frank, you don't look nearly as fat in person as you do on television. So it's been all
Senator Biden, why don't you
downhill.
rescue our friend?
I'll rescue my friend here and say it won't really be so personal with regard to Jeb Bush and his innate ability. It will be because the voters are looking for something fresh, new, different, inspirational, and that's just not the hand of cards he's been dealt. And if I could just, and we'll get to the questions here, I'd like to actually find some middle ground between Van and Frank. I think they both were right in some respects. I think Van is exactly right, given the average wage. Real wages in this country, after adjusted for inflation, have been stagnant for a decade. For middle-class families, haven't gone up a bit in 10 years. And that's led to a lot of angst out there on the part of the middle class. And so he's exactly right. This is going to be an issue that animates this election. But I think Frank is a little bit right, too. I think the way we Democrats go about addressing that core challenge for middle-class families should be cast in terms of, rather than just relative equality, we need to cast it in terms of opportunity and mobility. Because if we become the party that's kind of angry in class warfare and redistribute, I don't think that's going to get it in the places that Frank is doing these groups. But if we say what matters to us is that if you work hard and you do right, you have a path to get ahead, you can have a better life, your children can have a better life, that's what we're for. If we cast it that way, I think we got a great chance to win.
Ma'am, please go ahead and just please say who you are.
Elise Cooper. My question is, I'm looking what's going on with Scott Walker, and there's so much criticism of him currently. I'm saying the Democrats are afraid of him. That's why we see what happened, twice with his followers in Wisconsin, with the Milwaukee mayor in Wisconsin. I don't think the Democrats want him to get the nomination, and I'm wondering what you guys think.
Well, Governor Walker is in a fascinating position, right? The crucible right now in the Republican Party is, how do you win the nomination and the White House? There's a very clear path to how do you win the nomination, There's a very clear path to how you win the White House, and there's this vast yawning space between the two, which requires etcher-sketcher shaking to the point that the American public feels that you're not an authentic person. Governor Walker, because of the intensity and the aggression of his in-state recall efforts, has the character and the energy of a warrior that appeals to the base. And the question is, can he ride that energy while maintaining a policy vision that actually appeals to a general election? So he's in that position of having that kind of pivot possibility. Marco Rubio has some of that pivot possibility because he ran, again, on that kind of insurgent Tea Party imagination, but he has legislated. He has taken on some tough issues. I think the Walker question is really whether he is ready.
Ed Gillespie, you, and sir, we'll get you a microphone, but first, Ed Gillespie, you've said that you're going to stay out of the primary, that you're going to work very hard to help whoever the Republican nominee is win Virginia, and you described to me in a very compelling way how important Virginia is. Tell us your riff on Virginia, Ohio, Florida.
Well, if you look at the Electoral College map, the Democrats have a much bigger base than the Republicans do in the Electoral College today. It's as simple as that, and we really have to, our nominee, when you look at, I think the Electoral College hinges on Florida, Virginia, and Ohio. A Democrat could conceivably win 2 out of those 3 states and still win the White House. A Republican has to carry all 3 and tack on Colorado, Iowa, New Hampshire. And so from my perspective as a Virginian, the role that Virginia plays in the Electoral College is an outsized one. There is no path, in my view, to the White House for a Republican that does not include Virginia in the red column. And so I'm excited about our field. I think that we do have a lot of new ideas coming into the process, a lot of fresh faces, new generation of leadership, an interesting tug and pull between the Senate candidates and the gubernatorial, or the senators and the governors. There's a demand for strong executive leadership in the Republican Party right now. At the same time, this will be an election that focuses on national security and foreign policy issues as much as 2004. They're going to be very high.
Well, if that's true, Republicans are in trouble because you're running against a Secretary of State, and none of your candidates have extensive national security or foreign policy experience.
Well, but I think if you look at this Secretary of State's experience and what she's going to be able to run on from her time as Secretary of State, I think she's in bigger trouble than anybody who's not been Secretary of State for the past 6 years. So, but I do think that it's going to be that will be a vote determinative issue in a way we haven't seen in over a decade. But that's my point, Mike, is I think that, given the role of Virginia and my experience in Virginia and relationships there, that if I can help bring people together at the end of our nominating process and help our nominee carry Virginia, that's the most important thing I can do in terms of helping to win the White House.
Let's go high-low real quick. High, what should your candidates be doing to respond to the now importance, as you point out, of national security?
Well, I think you're seeing them talking about it because it's, they need to be talking about it. And I do think, when you look at the relative advantages, to me, I look at it as, the governors have certain inherent advantages. Like I say, in particular in terms of executive leadership. We were just talking about Scott Walker, his leadership in Wisconsin, which is obviously not that's not a red state. And yet he's gotten elected not once, not twice, but 3 times. His executive leadership, that of the other governors, Chris Christie, former Governor Bush, I don't know if John Kasich's going to get in, others, they bring a lot to bear. But at the same time, because of the Senate allows for foreign policy experience, I think that gives some of the senators an edge in the process.
You mentioned Governor John Kasich of Ohio. You were very involved in his 2000 campaign for president. What do you think the opportunity is for him this time?
Well, I think we've got a wide open field, and you see that. I mean, we're looking at potentially 19, people vying for the Republican Party nomination. And, John Kasich is a 2-term governor from the state of Ohio. We've just talked about the importance of Ohio in the Electoral College as well as Virginia and Florida. We've obviously 2 candidates vying from Florida. And, he carried 26 out of 28 counties, including Cuyahoga, and did very well with segments of the electorate that Republicans have not done well with, and that given the demographics of the country today, we have to do better with next year in order to win the White House. He's one who has not only the two-term governor of an important state, but he's got experience on the House Armed Services Committee. And so, look, I think if John runs, he'll be very formidable. But it's wide open, and I wouldn't. I think assessing tiers is very, very difficult right now. It's a parlor game.
What is the chance that he runs?
I just don't know.
Just think a couple of things. First of all, I think it's very easy in settings like this to kind of only say those things that we know fall well within the consensus of the people at our level of society. I just want to make some predictions about what we're going to see moving forward. I spend most of my time talking to people who are far from the centers of power and trying to interpret, to your point, and to your point, Senator, in a positive, constructive way, what we could actually do to make things better. First of all, the millennials, I think we often forget, they're the biggest generation in American history. The baby boomers were massive, and they changed everything. Generation Xers like myself barely get an internship from the baby boomers most of our careers. Now we look up, we're in our 40s, you look back, you've got people coming on in their 20s. This is a huge generation. I was talking on a college campus to some young folks, and I mentioned I work with Newt Gingrich. They just blinked. They know what I was talking about. Kids in college were born in 93. They're born in 94. So a lot of the stuff that means a great deal to us is completely, LBJ to me is Newt to them. So let's just get clear about that. So when they come on the scene, first of all, they're not comfortable with either party yet. They look at the Republican Party and they're very concerned about some stuff we haven't talked about at all in terms of Republicans misfit with them when it comes to marriage equality, misfit with them when it comes to embracing racial and ethnic diversity in an enthusiastic and authentic way. And so they're not comfortable. And the Democrats are going to, I think, do well trying to be the party that they can identify with on that level. At the same time, they are very angry, disappointed, and frustrated that the American dream that they were promised seems to be getting further and further away. They're graduating off a cliff into the worst economy for them that any generation has faced. They have massive debt. They don't see a pathway to car ownership, home ownership. That is going to be the battleground where Democrats, I think, are going to struggle a bit. And we're going to have to be able to point out that we do have a pathway to success for them. But if Republicans think that they can just beat up on Obama and the Obama economy, which is actually healing, and not deal with this cultural misfit, I think that Republicans are mistaken.
Frank, once you were nodding when Van Jones was making his point about Republicans and marriage, Republicans and young people, what does the party do to fix or alleviate that?
I'm looking also at how often they communicate. And I want to do something because some people at home will actually see this. So this room, there are about, 150 people in this room. And this is, by definition, this is Barack Obama's 1% are in this room right here. And there are enough of you who are 1/10 of 1%. When I count to 3, I want you to shout out your presidential candidate. You have to choose one. Foreigners, for one time only, unless you live in Chicago, you can vote in this. When I get to 3, you're going to shout out who your candidate is. You ready? 1, 2, 3. We're going to try one more time. 1, 2, 3. Well, the problem is we've got the loud woman in the front over here. You must be from Chicago, ma'am. The public has not made up their minds. And I'm nodding because I think that the marriage equality is going to be a problem for Republicans among 18 to 29-year-olds. In all the research that I've done, no matter where you stand morally on that issue, 18 to 29-year-olds do not see a problem. And they do not understand why Republicans are saying no. But I want to speak for 1 second about style, because we got CEOs in this room, and you guys have the same problem. If you're reading your speech, you are losing.
Thank you.
Because it means that somebody else wrote it for you. It means that they're not your words and you don't know it. Number 2, if you can only show up dressed like this, you are losing. Because the average American now does not work dressed like this. And it creates a distance. Number 3, why do these politicians not ask questions? In all these town halls, I do not understand it. Okay, we're going to open up the questions. Why doesn't the person running for office ask you a question, because that's what teaches Americans that they actually care about what you think.
Okay,
and that you're not
I always take
responsible.
Frank's advice, so boom, sir, ask a question.
Yeah, my name is Carl Donovan, and I served for 8 years in state legislature, run for Congress. So the question I'm asking is based on me on the ground. In our state, or my great frustration when I served was this. All the issues we've talked about go down to education. And yet in my state, the CTA controls the Democratic Party. Some Republicans walk across the aisle. You don't walk across if you're Democratic CTA. In my communication, African American, I go in there and I explain the power of vouchers, letting you choose just like a rich person chooses the school. They're all for it, and yet the CTA fights it. How can, and in other states we've seen vouchers, choice, school choice is very, very powerful. How can we get the bridge of the Democratic Party to come towards the Republican idea on that?
So Mike patted me on the shoulder. Thank you for that one, Mike. So first of all, I think the issue of school choice is an incredibly powerful issue for the Republican Party. And I think it's important for you to be mentioning it today. And I think it's something that the Democratic Party and the unions are going to have to grapple with. I will point to some modest progress in Congress. And that is that we now see, in the Senate at least, Senators Alexander and Murray working together on reforming at least the federal role in education by taking some of the testing down a little bit. They're actually having some, challenges with the federal teachers associations, and you're seeing Democrats actually not simply, running for the shadows. So I think, most of the education issues you point out is at the state level. I think the unions in the states are obviously deeply entrenched in that discussion. I think California is uniquely a challenging situation, but I think it is an important issue and an opportunity for Republican candidates to engage a lot of the concerns that I think Van was talking about.
But your language is wrong. It's not school choice. It's not even parental choice. It's equal opportunity in education, so that every child, no matter their family status, no matter their zip code, has the opportunity for quality education. It's not vouchers. They're opportunity scholarships. It's not about education reform. It's about excellence in education. Education reform is process. Excellence is the result. And it's about giving our children the skills they need for college, career, and life, so that it reaches everybody.
Now I hope you stop listening to him.
Senator By, at this moment, which party is smarter on this issue?
I'm not sure either party has captured this issue, Mike. There are a lot of interesting experiments taking place at the state level. A gentleman might be interested in my own home state of Indiana. We have a voucher program in Indiana now. I saw Governor Daniels here. He started it. It's been continued under Governor Pence. So we'll see how it's going to work. We'll have a real-life experiment, see how it works. There's a lot of experimentation with charter schools to try and inject some competitive market forces into the public school system. So we'll see how that works. And I would say, interestingly, I would say this. Markets are great at promoting efficiency. But what we want, and I think Frank put his finger on it, is an excellent education for every child. A market does not guarantee that a lot of children aren't going to be left behind. Right. And the reason for that, I just say two final things, Mike. If you look, the kids who do best in those competitive environments are the ones that have, these are very often single-parent homes, inner-city schools, economically challenged. If they have one parent that cares, that really pays attention and says, I'm going to try and make sure my child in a competitive marketplace goes to the best school, they do well. But there are a whole lot of kids out there where that's not happening. And where they don't have that kind of support and advice, how are they going to thrive in a competitive market-based system? And those are the kids you really got to be concerned about. Final thing I'd say, there is some potential for middle ground here. This is not widely known. Teddy Kennedy, of all people, back in the No Child Left Behind bill that was enacted under President Bush, actually agreed to a system where the public schools would be evaluated over a period of time, and if the local school was rated to be failing, got an F, the children in that school could seek remedial help either in the public school, or the parent could decide to opt out of the public school and seek remedial help through a for-profit provider of some kind out of the public school system. So there were the seeds of some sort of consensus where you still invest in public schools, that's the pillar, but you inject some competitive forces, and if the local public school just isn't doing the job, well then ultimately there's a way for parents to seek a better education for their child. But markets add a lot, but markets aren't perfect. We got to be concerned about the kids who don't have the support they need to succeed in a market-based educational system.
Okay, I think I saw another hand in this neighborhood. Okay, go ahead, ma'am. And please just say who you are.
Liz Peek with the Crystal Times. My question is, why isn't Elizabeth Warren running? She is 1 year younger than Hillary. If she's ever going to do it, this is her moment. Lots of enthusiasm for her on the left, as you pointed out. Or do you think she will and she's just stonewalling?
She's having a much greater impact on the outcome by not running.
Well, but she's also very ambitious.
Yeah, and the flip side, and I'm going to address this to Senator Bai, a point that they made on Morning Joe that I agreed with was the Obama lesson is, if you look back to when he was a freshman senator in '08, the Obama lesson is that you can't wait. When you're hot, you have to go. Elizabeth Warren will never be hotter. Why doesn't she go?
Mike, I've not spoken to her about it, so the short answer is I don't know. But perhaps she doesn't aspire to be president of the United States.
Yeah, right.
Perhaps she aspires to be an important public figure to affect the debate, as Jason was saying. But you know, it's possible to be a good public servant and effective without wanting to be president of the United States for a host of reasons. So maybe that's the path that she's chosen.
Well, I have spoken to her. Her view is that there is a movement that is growing that can affect both parties. It is affecting both parties. Again, as much as people may be uncomfortable with this, before 2011, if you said anything negative about income inequality, for lack of a better term, you were almost out of politics. If you said raise taxes on wealthy people, even as a Democrat. Now, people may not like those answers, but the concerns that were being pointed to, that people were falling behind, and it seemed that no one cared, which Occupy Wall Street underscored, Elizabeth Warren points to, that has become ground zero for American politics. And she knows that by continuing to speak to that, she's realigning both parties to at least address the pain. Different solutions, but to point to the same pain, number one. Number two, let's be clear. She said many times she's not running. The biggest network in Iowa today for any candidate is for her. Just be very clear. So the progressive grassroots is going ahead anyway. If Hillary slips, stumbles, and falls and can't run for some reason, the biggest network in the country will be for Elizabeth Warren.
Ground zero is Washington and what Washington has done to you rather than for you.
That's a way of framing the pain.
This is not, this is the work that we're doing, and I make you the offer, and this is the kind of stuff that normally I don't talk about, but I will suggest that you guys would do very well if you focused on this. The number one thing you ask people, if you ask them, do we need to address inequality in America or to make Washington, and this is the specific language, more efficient, more effective, and more accountable? By 3-2, they will not say income inequality. They will say the damage that Washington has done to the country and to themselves. The hostility to Washington has never been higher than it is now. It's higher than '94, it's higher than 2014. And the candidate that can show that they can make Washington more efficient, more effective, and accountable is a candidate that wins in 2016.
And Mike, it's worth noting that members of Congress went home and got standing ovations. Bob Corker described being greeted with a standing applause because of the work that he did on the Iran issue. So, and I think Frank is absolutely right. There is a visceral frustration and anger, but it's a very low bar for progress. And the country wants the country to work. So I actually think you're making a very important point, but members of Congress who are running as legislators, governors who are running as problem solvers, people who are running and saying, you know, I can have principles, but I can also have a disagreement that's not disagreeable, are the people who are going to capture that spirit.
Congress has a 12% job approval rating. 12%. Gaddafi had a 15% job approval rating.
Frank is the author of a number of books that are very helpful for leaders of any sort of organization, including CEOs, leaders of nonprofit. One of your most famous books, Words That Work. Who is the best communicator on the American scene today? Most effective based on your principles, your study?
The governors usually generically do better than the senators, even though the senators spend time, their whole job is to talk. But the governors can actually point to a record of accomplishment. The best communicator, actually by far, is Marco Rubio. Whenever we dial him, he just, with the exception of his State of the Union response, with the exception of that, he just does the best. And by the way, he does it because he talks about, I get choked up. The single best thing I've ever heard him say is that his father, would attend bar in a portable bar, not a real one, a portable one, in the back of these convention halls, and would work 7 days a week, 16, 18 hours a day, so that his son could someday address those same people from the front of the room. And every time I hear, I'm waiting for the day when that stops getting me.
So Frank, does Marco Rubio have a Barack Obama problem, though? Right? I mean, if you look at the basic structural critique of President Obama, it is inspiration, sizzle.
With one exception, which is Marco Rubio was the Speaker of the Florida House. Marco Rubio actually ran one of the most contentious, difficult legislative bodies, and he was acclaimed for what he did by Democrats and Republicans. He ran it very effectively. Barack Obama was a legislator who never showed up. So that
that's a little hard. Yeah, look. I mean, look. I love when you guys make those kind of mistakes. I do because it's very helpful to us when you do stuff like that. Cheap shot at Obama for no reason at all. I don't think people.
No, it's actually the truth. To you, it's a cheap shot. To the American people, it's the truth.
It's very interesting because one of the great things is you guys driving, looking in the rearview mirror. Look at the numbers today on Obama. The country is re-warming up to Obama. Obama is above water for the first time on the economy. As tough as the economy is for middle-class people, more people say it's strong, say the economy is good than bad for the first time. The country is actually re-warming up to Obama. Part of, I think, what people miss when they do stuff like that is how dearly he is held to a large number of people. You get choked up by Rubio, and I get choked up by Rubio. And I don't want to have any, I hope nobody on our side has to run against Rubio. He's extraordinary. But we still get choked up by Obama. Obama in Selma, 50th anniversary, standing on that bridge where John Lewis was beaten almost to death, and speaking to the country and talking about what that meant. For some people in this room, who cares? I'm telling you, there's a big chunk of people in this country that means the world to. And there's no point in taking cheap shots.
And the tragedy is, and take it for what it's worth, how many of you think race relations have improved under, I wish there was a camera up here. Raise your hands if you think race relations have improved over the last 6.5 years under President Barack Obama. Raise your hands if they are better.
I wouldn't raise my hand. I wouldn't raise my hand.
How many of you think they're better? Not a single hand has gone up in this room. Okay, we got one. One person. How many of you think they've gotten worse under the last 6.5 years?
And then the question is, who do you blame? Do you blame Fox and people who every day, let me finish. He'll get a chance to talk. He'll get a chance to talk.
Here, everyone.
Oh, here we go. You don't like it, do you? You don't like it. And here's the point. When you have Fox News saying that Sharia law is coming to Ohio, that doesn't help with race relations. This is going to be very important in this room. And look, we're all friends here. We are. I know a lot of people in this room. This is going to be very important. This question of racial, this racial readjustment that both sides, that all sides are going to have to go through, how it's handled, the spirit that's brought to it. My good friend Frank was pointing out when we talked about incarceration a lot of personal responsibility points, which I agree with. A lot of family responsibility points, which I agree with. But the Republican who can make those points and at the same time say what Rand Paul is saying, which is, and there's something wrong with our system when everybody knows that a kid smoking dope at Yale doesn't get in trouble, a kid smoking dope in a housing project goes to prison. If you can, as a Republican, speak to both the personal family responsibility and the need for our system to do better, you can find a home. But when there's this tone deafness to some of the nuances, I think both sides have to look at it, but Republicans suffer in a growing people of color country.
I was going to say, can I find some common ground between my two friends down at the other? Look, I think Van is exactly right, that people want an inspirational leader. They want someone who will make this country a more decent and just and compassionate place and will uplift the American people's spirits. At the same time, that doesn't put food on the table. That doesn't create a better paying job. That doesn't make college more affordable. So there's a hunger, as Frank was saying, to make the government work again. And the candidate who's going to be most successful in this campaign is the one that can combine and reconcile those two things, the ability to inspire, but do so in a credible, believable way that will actually improve people's lives. That's the sweet spot.
Senator Bai, you still have a D after your name, and in March 2011, you went to work as a contributor for Fox News. What was that like?
Well, they've never told me what to say. I get to kind of be the contrarian, standing up for. Actually, I just say what I think, which is usually, I hope, practical advice about substance and politics. And I am still a Democrat, and I do support Hillary Clinton. Just for those of you who are here, but I do so because I want to see the government work. And so the best thing I can tell you about Fox is they just have let me say what I want to say, and have never told me what to say.
Jason Grumet, in 1988, you were the national debate champion, and as part of that, you beat who?
It's a long time ago, but I think what you're leading at is the fact that someone whose name has shockingly not come up once, Senator Cruz, was part of that experience. And I think far more interesting than the fact that I happened to win a debate case is that we haven't actually mentioned him over the last hour or so.
We haven't mentioned Rand Paul either.
Well,
I did.
We mentioned
I just
Rand
did.
Paul.
I
So
did.
all I will say is that, and I think the New York Times wrote a story about this. Ted was a year or two behind me. He was an incredibly effective debater. The way this all worked was there were kind of two styles. You would have these private debates, and then the people who would win those would go to these kind of big public rooms, and he and his partner were exceptionally good in the private rounds. When you got to the public rounds, the people who were voting for you were the people you had vanquished in those private rounds. And he did less well there. When it came to connecting with a group of people and making people feel part of something, and he tended to come in second more than first.
If Frank's video has come back to life, we'll just go ahead and cue it. Until that happens, I'm going to ask a question of Senator Bai. Everybody in this room loves political scenarios. We love the game. That's why we're here so early on a Monday morning. When we were waiting for our bags yesterday, you threw out a very interesting scenario to me, and that was what you called a reverse, and sorry Ed, to give you flashbacks here, but a reverse Bush v. Gore.
Well, I think my own take on the presidential election is going to be very close, basically 50-50. As Ed was pointing out, the Electoral College skews heavily towards the Democrats. Demography also favors us if we can excite our base and get them out. The desire for something new, fresh, different, that may benefit the Republicans depending on who they nominate. So I think on the popular vote, it's pretty easy, but given the Electoral College tilt, I could see the Republicans narrowly winning the popular vote, but the Democrats winning the Electoral College in a reverse Gore v. Bush situation.
Ed Gillespie, how worried are you about the marriage issue and the Republican Party?
Well, it's interesting to me. One of the things that I've seen for some time, and I have children who are millennials, obviously, and one of the uniquely growing segments of our electorate are those who are pro-life, pro-gay marriage, which is an interesting. That's something 10 years ago you would never have seen that kind of alignment. And so I do think in terms of the issue, obviously, how we talk about it, there should be a discussion about it, I think a debate. One of the things that concerns me is the drive to shut down any discussion or debate about it. I think what we've seen in the states, and I believe that it is the proper purview of the states to determine marriage, is largely has been worked out kind of remarkably, and I think it's a reflection of the civil discourse that has taken place over the past decade. Hard-pressed to find a social issue that has moved this fast, in our nation's history, and I think it is a reflection of civil discourse taking place largely in the states. And so I do worry if the Supreme Court disrupts that and has a federal, imposes a federal view on marriage, that's going to poison the well some in terms of the nature of the debate. And so we'll see. I mean, the court is going to have play an important role here, but I think one of the things that those of us who believe, in the merits of a federalist system, I think you see the merits of a federalist system in the debate over marriage in the way it's played out in the states. I think if the court federalizes it, it'll change the nature of that debate in a way. But to me, and I'm one who believes that marriage, for me, it's not just a belief, it's one of 7 sacraments, that it is between one man and one woman, but I also have a lot of friends who don't agree with that, and I believe that the debate should take place properly in the states.
We're about to get the hook here, so Frank will have the last word. You have the opportunity to give one sentence of advice to Hillary Clinton and one sentence of advice to the Republican nominee. You tell them what?
Well, first thing, if you want to see the video, I'm speaking tomorrow, and I will show you the best and the worst of language, as well as the best and worst ads. So come tomorrow. My piece of advice to Hillary Clinton is, after all this time, you really need a communication coach. And I'm being very serious, because she has got, her experience is beyond any other political candidate by far. But she can't communicate effectively, and after all this time, we expect her to be able to reach out and touch to us. And my advice to the Republican Party is actually not that far from what you've said. I do believe that if the GOP gets into the income inequality and addresses the challenges not just of middle and upper middle class Americans, but all hardworking taxpayers, and focuses on everyone and all, don't target the inner city, don't target suburbia, focus on all Americans and how you lift everyone's opportunity, that will be their success for 2016.
We want to thank Michael Milken and the Milken Institute for this remarkable opportunity. Thank all of you for coming out so early. Thank this panel. We're going to do the hardworking people at the Milken Institute a favor. We are going to hustle out of this room. We're going to stay around to visit with you outside the room. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great conference.